thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure to have met some of you this morning, and I enjoyed and was so moved by the table conversation among our group here. I am a mother. I have 3 children, now young adults, Jeremy, Annalise, and David. I've been with my husband, Krister, or Chris, for 30 years. I also practice law, and in recent years, I've started writing. I actually went back to school and got my MFA degree 5 or 6 years ago. Our older son had just left for college. Our daughter was about to leave for college. I was about to become the mother of 1 child at home instead of 3, and I realized I was going to have a lot of time on my hands. And so I went back in the evenings and got my MFA degree. And the book that I am going to be talking about this morning was actually my master's thesis for my degree. Part of the degree requirement is producing a book-length work. So I'd like to talk to you about memoir and about some of the elements of memoir that are important and that I struggled with in writing this book. And also, along the way, share some of our story that's reflected in the book with you. Memoir, I'd like to start just by defining what that word means to me. It's a literary work. It's not an autobiography. An autobiography is the story of a life. A memoir is a story from a life. This memoir actually is a story of a very small part of my family's life. The whole book covers a 3-month period. So memoir does not need to be extended in terms of the time or the events covered. Something very meaningful can emerge from a very short period, a short episode in our lives. I'll tell you first a little bit about what happened to our family, what the memoir is about, and then talk about the form and some of the learning I achieved as I was struggling with bringing this book to the page. This first paragraph to me says a lot about what I think the book is about. Nothing marks the last normal hours of your life as special. Nothing that you look back on and say, there, that was the turning point. If only I had paid attention, I would have known, I would have treasured those hours, if only. You awaken one morning to the same mundane details as any other day. Housework, grocery shopping, squabbling children, sticky hands and faces, small irritations and small pleasures. Without warning, life pivots sharply, and you have left your last inestimably precious normal moment far behind. Then you would give anything to have it back, but it is lost to you forever. My book opens on a Saturday afternoon of Labor Day weekend. We were at home, my whole family was there. I had taken my younger son to a birthday party and come home, and he was in the shower getting cleaned off. His sister was coaching him through the shower. I was folding laundry, and Chris, my husband, and Jeremy, our older son, were downstairs in the kitchen, and Chris came upstairs, and I thought, okay, we're going to have another errand to do to get ready for school starting, and he said, I think Jeremy's having a stroke. I said, what? He said, I think Jeremy's having a stroke. It was hard for me to take in what he was saying. My husband is always very calm, even under times of stress, sometimes perhaps too calm. My heart lurched and accelerated. Lisi, get David out of the shower and dry it off and stay here. I rapped out and flew down the stairs, swiveled at the landing, leaped down more stairs, and skidded around the corner into the kitchen. Chris, call 911, echoed off the stairwell in my wake. Jeremy was lying on his back on the bleached oak floor between the stove and the refrigerator. I fell to my knees next to him. His eyes, usually so luminous, were dark with terror "Mom, what's wrong? I can't move my right side. What's wrong with me?" he asked, with a child's faith that I could take away his fear. "Help me," he pleaded. "Please help me. Please, please." His words trailed off. And I, despite my fierce and watchful mother love, my worldly competence, I could do nothing to save him. What had happened to Jeremy is that an artery very deep in his brain had spontaneously exploded. This was as a result of a congenital anomaly in the blood vessel. It was a weakened blood vessel. And it suddenly, without any warning, literally ruptured, exploded, and flooded his brain with blood. Within 20 to 30 minutes, well, within 20 minutes after he fell to the kitchen floor, he was unconscious. Fortunately, the local fire station was close to our home, and the fire paramedic team arrived very quickly. 30 minutes after he fell to the floor, he was no longer breathing and was intubated and in an ambulance and on the way to our local pediatric trauma center. That started a long process of sitting by Jeremy's bedside in the intensive care unit in the hospital. Chris and I stayed with him around the clock, 24 hours a day. He was in a coma initially. The bleeding was unable to be treated. Normally, when something like this happens, if the injury is higher in the brain, surgery can be performed to fix or remove the part of the blood vessel that's bleeding. But his injury was deep, deep in the very center of his brain, and it was inoperable. It was called a grade 6 inoperable AVM, arteriovenous malformation. So he bled for 2 weeks. The neurosurgeons cut holes in his skull, installed plastic tubes that ran deep into his brain, connected the tubes to liter-sized bags that were suspended from IV stands on each side of his bed, and drained the blood. And we sat next to his bed for 2 weeks watching the blood flowing through the plastic tubes, dripping into the bags. Eventually, the artery clotted closed and he stopped bleeding, and eventually he awakened from his coma. But when he awakened, he was very badly damaged. He was completely paralyzed on the right half of his body. The bleed had been on the left side, so he had complete hemiparesis on the right half of his body. He couldn't move at all. He couldn't speak at all, and he had very little vision left. The story takes many twists and turns, as often happens when one is injured or hospitalized. His condition progressed for the worse. It was a cascading series of medical catastrophes, one following another, surgery following surgery. He went back and forth between 2 different hospitals. And through it all, we sat next to his bedside and prayed. And prayer actually was, we believe, a very important factor in bringing about as much recovery as our son ultimately achieved. There was really nothing that the doctors could do. There's nothing that can be done to heal an injured brain. They could keep him on life support, they could keep him alive. But once he awakened and was paralyzed and couldn't speak, there was really nothing that could be done to bring those functions back. Anything that could be done was up to Jeremy, was up to our family, to our faith, and to God. So why would anyone want to write a story like this? What's to be gained by putting a lot of very personal material down on the page? Why might any of you want to write a memoir? Why does anyone care? I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, why do I care? Why do I, the writer, want to tell this story? There may be many answers: to preserve family history, to discover symbolism and meaning and metaphor in the personal events of our lives, to illuminate universal themes, I wasn't sure why I was writing when I first started writing this book. I had a laptop computer in the hospital with me, and my husband and I were there every other night. And when I was there late at night with Jeremy after he was asleep, I took out my laptop and I just wrote. I wrote two things. I wrote emails that I sent out to a network, first a very small network of family and friends, to just tell them what was going on and reflect on the events we were living through. And then the people I emailed forwarded my emails on to other people. Eventually we had a vast email network, literally covering the US, Canada, parts of Europe, even as far away as South Africa and Australia, with people emailing me back saying, "We're praying for you, we're thinking of you." And I also just wrote down what was happening. This was 11 years ago. I just sat and I wrote down what was happening. I wasn't sure why I was writing. I tried to explain what I thought at the time. I had no concept that I was trying to write a book. At first, I wrote only to pass on news. As time went on, writing became part meditation, part prayer, a way of processing the day's events. The email distribution list grew exponentially as my messages were forwarded on and on again. In the weeks and months that followed, I continued to record the story of my family's new life. Late at night, when I was exhausted by the struggles of the day, a key turned in the attic of my mind, a door opened, and sentences marched out whole through my fingers onto the pale blue computer screen. In writing, I found an intuitive, blind salvation, a lifeline that tethered me to solid ground. When I wrote, I retreated to a sanctuary in my head high above the dark waters that flooded the lower levels of my dwelling place. I could not avoid those waters altogether. Too often, waves of feeling buried me in anguish as I witnessed the ruination of my son's mind and body, and relinquished all but the barest form of hope. Does he still breathe? Will he awaken? But I was able to turn that key from time to time, enter the room upstairs, and find, if not respite from pain, then at least a calm place to take it in and weave it into the structure of who I was and was becoming. And so I wrote. So I would say the first stage in writing, especially a memoir, is to find your own reason for writing. You may not fully understand the story you want to tell. In fact, likely you won't. A critical element of memoir is that it is not simply a story. Vladimir Nabokov wrote in his book Speak Memory that the work of the memoirist is to perceive and tease out the pattern that exists in life. For most writers, when they start, they don't fully understand what that pattern that the events they're writing about hold, what that pattern looks like. And it emerges through thought, reflection, time, and from the writing process itself. It took me 10 years, almost 10 years, 8 years maybe, to figure out what the pattern was in my story. When Jeremy, a year after Jeremy had come home from the hospital, I had probably 500 pages of just these notes that I had written down while he was in the hospital. I thought it was simply Jeremy's story. It was a story about what had happened to him. I didn't think I, as the narrator, was even present or part of the story. I actually went back and pulled up one of my earliest drafts just to give you a sense of how absent I was in the story. And just read a little bit of what a certain passage looked like originally, and then after many years of reflection and revision. This was written about the very first evening that Jeremy was in the hospital. Jeremy is almost unrecognizable when we finally see him again late in the evening of the first day. The hours since he entered surgery have been the worst of our lives.